Yo, what's up, folks? It's your boy Sports PSP. Hope everyone's enjoying a fantastic day. Man, we got to talk about some news regarding Mark Jackson and ESPN. ESPN has decided to let go of Mark Jackson. This is what Jackson told Peter Veske on Monday. I'm reading an article here from Sports Illustrated, Daniel Shofkin. So I want to make sure I give credit where credit is due. Jackson first joined ESPN in 2006 after he retired from the league and worked with Mike Breen and Jeff Van Gundy on the number one broadcast team. After leaving for 3 seasons as the Golden State Warriors head coach from 2011 to 2014, Jackson returned to ESPN back to his previous position where he has been ever since. In total, Jackson was part of the NBA Finals for 14 different seasons while with ESPN, teaming up with Van Gundy and Breen for each one. ESPN already let Van Gundy as part of a series of layoffs this summer, but did not immediately announce his replacement. Earlier on Monday, the New York Post's Andrew Marchand reported that ESPN was moving forward with Doris Burke and Doc Rivers, joining Breen as the main broadcast crew. Burke has been with ESPN since the 1990s, while Rivers was fired by the 76ers in the offseason. So what are my thoughts about Mark Jackson? It's really unfortunate that he was let go. It's just not the same anymore, especially with all the layoffs with ESPN. I mean, Mark Jackson, Jeff Van Gundy, Suzy Kolber, Jalen Rose, Max Kellerman. And I hate to say this, but ESPN is disintegrating right before our very eyes. It's just not the same anymore. Sure, they have Stephen A. Smith. Sure, they have Pat McAfee. I don't know if Pat McAfee's on ESPN. Maybe he is or maybe not. I think he is. But ESPN, I hate to say this, they are just falling apart. With all these layoffs, they let go of Mark Jackson. I hope Mark Jackson gets back on his feet. I thought this was a big mistake by ESPN letting go of him. I have no problem with Doris Burke. Doris Burke knows her basketball. She's very insightful, very knowledgeable. Love listening to what she has to say on her perspective about basketball and more. Doc Rivers, it seems like to me his days as an NBA head coach might be numbered because it's been since that lockout season that he's been to a conference finals. Since that time, he hasn't. He hasn't won a championship since that 2007-2008 season. He hasn't been to the finals since the 2009-2010 season. So it's been more than a decade since he's last won a championship. And look, the reason why he's not an NBA head coach right now is because he has constantly come up short in the playoffs. His 3 seasons in Philadelphia and his time with the Clippers, he blew 2 3-1 leads during his time with the head coach as for the Los Angeles Clippers. No one's going to forget the Houston Rockets series as well as the Denver Nuggets series. That's on his resume. First coach in NBA history to blow 3 3-1 leads in Orlando and 2 with the Clippers. In Philadelphia, he had Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons the first year. They failed. They came up short in the conference semifinals against the Atlanta Hawks, primarily because of how much of a liability Ben Simmons was. Doc Rivers defended Ben Simmons at one point. He said, "You don't know basketball if you think I'm going to take Ben Simmons out the ball game." And then after, when the series was over, Doc Rivers was asked a question, "Do you think you can win a championship with Ben Simmons as your point guard?" And Doc's response was, "I don't know the answer to that question." And then after those 2 seasons, conference semifinals, exit, conference semifinals, exit. Last season, this was a great opportunity for the 76ers to get to the conference finals. The year that Joel Embiid won the MVP, made first team All-NBA. Game 6 at Philly, at Wells Fargo's arena or center, and they came up short. Jason Tatum was awful those first 3 quarters, but in the 4th quarter, he showed up, and he clearly showed up in Game 7. Even though we can talk about James Harden and Joel Embiid coming up short, still that's on Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers cannot be absolved. So it's going to be a little while for Doc Rivers to be a head coach. I mean, of course he can coach. No one's going to argue his resume. He's definitely going to go to the Hall of Fame. But it's been more than a decade since he's last won a championship. And right now, if you just look at him, he is a playoff choker. That's just the truth. So, him and ESPN, I mean, he's been around, he's done TV, he's done stuff like that before. So, he has to find a different alternative in case if he doesn't have another opportunity as a head coach. So, he has to take on the opportunity that's given to him. But still, I just felt bad for Mark Jackson because, Mark Jackson, I believe, without question, he's been blackballed of the NBA. Before Steve Kerr became the head coach, he was the one who set the foundation. He talked about how great Steph Curry and Klay Thompson were, how they're the greatest shooting backcourt, and they are. Mark Jackson was responsible for that. Mark Jackson was responsible for building the foundation in Golden State. Not to diminish or take anything away what Steve Kerr did. Of course, he was there and he capitalized on it and he made the most out of it. But Mark Jackson set the foundation. And now that he's no longer at ESPN, how's Doc Rivers going to compete? How's Doc Rivers going to supersede Mark Jackson? Because Mark Jackson, man, him and Jeff Van Gundy and Mike Breen, they were fun. Mike Breen with the bang, or Mark Jackson saying, "Mama, there goes that man." Now it's gone. And with ESPN, speaking of ESPN, all these layoffs, man, with Jeff Van Gundy, Max Kellerman, Keyshawn Johnson, Susie Colbert, the list goes on and on. Are we witnessing the beginning of the end of ESPN? Because ESPN is falling apart. That's my thoughts. So please weigh in. Please leave your comments in the comment section below, folks. What do you make of Mark Jackson being fired of ESPN? Do you think ESPN made the right or wrong decision? How will Doc Rivers and Doris Burke handle replacing him? And much more.